Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me on our last week of live CNA prep. I'm excited. I'm just chiming in Instagram. How y'all doing? Welcome. I'm going to do a little snippet on Instagram, but I would highly recommend that you join us on YouTube for the full video. We're going to go through some questions like we normally do and get started on our prep. All right, let's go. Awesome. All right, so the first question is, you can assist the independent resident with exercise or ambulation by A, using verbal encouragement, B, being close during ambulation, C, using a gait belt during ambulation and movement, or D, doing nothing. You do not need to assist an independent resident. So let's go back to the question. I always tell students, when you're prepping for your review, you want to read the question, read the answers, go back and read it at least 3 times. As the rule of thumb. Do it as many times as you need, but don't obsess, right? If you start to feel anxious during the test, I want you to take a breath, and remember to ask yourself, what is this question asking me? That's all. I just don't bring your home, don't bring your experiences into this exam, okay? So the question says, you can assist the independent resident with exercise or ambulation by. So A says you can use verbal encouragement, B, being close during ambulation, C, using gait belt during ambulation and movement, and D, doing nothing. You do not need to assist an independent resident. So the key words in this is independent. This resident means that they don't, when it says independent, that means they don't need an assistive device. They're not using a walker, a wheelchair, a cane. They don't need you. But for whatever reason, the question is asking, it's saying you can assist. So if this person is independent, they're not using an assistive device, how else can we assist this resident is the question. So what are your thoughts? Is it verbal encouragement? Is it being close, like being present during ambulation? Is it using a gait belt during ambulation? Would you even use a gait belt for an independent resident? Is a good question to ask. Would I even use a gait belt if this person is independent and don't need support? Or D, we do nothing. All right, so think about that. Put your answers in the comment section on YouTube. The answer is A, using verbal encouragement. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Because this person is independent, again, meaning they don't need an assistive device. They don't need a walker. They don't need a cane. They don't need anything to support them. So what is the next best thing that I can do is encourage them. And even, even maybe give them a verbal cue. On the count of 3, you're going to stand. You can hold on to your side rail to be able to support you. And you can do this, right? So that is maybe a tricky question, but just remember keywords. The key word to me in this question was independent. This person does not need support. Number 2, you are performing range of motion exercises for a resident who has a weakened right arm and leg. One of the required movements on the resident's care plan is abduction. This means A, increasing the joint angle, B, moving away from the midline of the body, C, moving toward the midline of the body, or D, moving the foot so that toes are pointing downward. So this question is covered when it talks about the body and the alignment and position. It's going to be in your chapter 4 of your Hartman textbook if you're using Hartman. In that area, in that chapter, it talks about ADDuction or abduction, adduction. So you need to know what this word means. This is a question that has to do with knowledge. Do you even know what abduction means? If you don't know it, it's going to be hard to do a good guess. It's going to be it's just going to be a guess at the end of the day. So you really need to know your words when it comes to the test, some of the terms. Now, do we use these terms practically? Honestly, no. We don't even use that language when we are providing range of motion, which is what they're describing, because it says you are performing range of motion exercises. So one of the ways that I use a term, or how I remember abduction and adduction. So adduction, abduction is the ADD. If I'm adding something to my body, I'm bringing it towards me, okay? Adduction. And then it uses the term midline. Sometimes words can trip students up and you just don't even think, because you're like, this doesn't make sense, and then you freeze. I want you to take a breath if you do that. Midline is the middle of the body, right? It's not like, sometimes the word is informing you of what it's talking about. So midline is the middle. I'm bringing it towards the middle of the body. So ADD, adduction is I'm adding something, I'm bringing it towards the body. AB, away. So that was my way of remembering how to differentiate between adduction and abduction. So here it's asking for abduction, and you should have been able to get that based on my way of remembering that. This is moving away from the midline of the body. So that means I'm moving the arm away from the resident's body. All right, away. ABD. All right, those are the first three letters of this word. If you're on Instagram, you're going to have to go to YouTube to see the word, to visually see it, but I'm trying to describe it as best as I can. Number 3, Juanita has a pressure injury on her tailbone that requires treatment. The person responsible for the treatment could be A, physical therapist, B, occupational therapist, C, speech therapist, or D, none of the above. So this question, again, is what I call a knowledge question. They want to know, do you know the scope? And the scope of practice is the term that we learn in class. What is the scope of these disciplines? So number 1, Juanita has a pressure or injury on her tailbone that requires treatment. The person that's responsible for that treatment could be who? Right? So we got physical therapist, occupational therapist, and speech therapist, and then D, none of the above. So one of the things I don't like about this question is that a pressure injury typically is going to be a wound of some kind, an opening on that person's body. And it's because they've been laying in that position, potential, especially the tailbone, that usually is with residents who are incontinent. And if they're not being changed on time and turned every 2 hours, pressure injuries can occur. If they're real bony and they don't have a lot of cushion, adipose tissue, fat to help, then they can get pressure injuries and other reasons. But that's one of the top reasons. Usually we're talking about treatment. I don't like the way this is worded, because a treatment is usually going to be something a nurse does and functions, right? So it would be a nurse that would provide treatment, but it doesn't give nurse as an option. So if you're thinking what I'm thinking and you have this question on your CNA exam, don't get hung up on that detail. The nurse is not an option in this question. So it's not an option. So who's the next best person to be able to provide treatment? And then what would that look like? So I would need to know what an occupational therapist does, what a physical therapist does, and what a speech therapist does, and then do a process of elimination, right? So speech don't work with pressure injuries. We can eliminate them. Occupational therapy, one of the ways that I like to differentiate them is occupational therapists typically work with fine-tuned skills. Like, think about a person like a wounded soldier that's coming home and he needs to brush his teeth, but let's say he's not able to move his arms. An occupational therapist will work on them, literally doing the little, like, I don't know how to call it, but like picking up that spoon, the little tedious tasks, brushing the teeth, occupation, the things that would ultimately his activities of daily living, like those little bitty fine-tuned muscles, right? Physical therapist is kind of like a personal trainer. They're going to work on big muscle groups, right? So who would help with that pressure ulcer? Would it be an occupational therapist based on my description, my little, no. So the next person that's there is going to be the physical therapist. The physical therapist. And one of the ways that they can help is also helping this resident with turning, how to alleviate pressure off of that tailbone. They can help them with movement, how to move themselves in the bed and alternate their position if they're starting to feel pain, right? So they help with anything that takes the full body muscle group to be able to work with them. So that's how I would navigate that question. Number 4, the first step in a person's physical therapy is A, an evaluation by the nurse. B, the therapist determines the resident's goals. C, an evaluation by the physical therapist. D, the therapist designs the plan of care. So when we're talking about, again, this is a knowledge question, knowing what physical therapy does and how they function in the care plan of a resident is important. And in the first 3 chapters, I want to say your first chapter in chapter 1, it talks about the chain of command, and it talks about and defines physical therapists for us and what their role is. So you needed to know and understand to some degree what their role is. So it's asking us, like, what is the first step in a physical therapy situation? You know, is it going to be the evaluation of the nurse? The evaluation of the therapist decides and determines the goals that the resident is trying to accomplish. C, an evaluation by a physical therapist. Or D, the therapist designs the plan of care. So one of the things you should know is that before we can do anything in a care plan and try to figure out what we need to be able to do for a resident, we have to have some type of assessment or evaluation, because that's going to allow us to understand what the resident's needs are and what goals we need to set. So that's always going to be the first step. Even if that resident is moving into a facility, the nurse will assess their needs, or whoever is a part of the care plan, they also will be informed of that assessment. So an assessment and evaluation is always top of line before we can start to do anything. And even before you can provide care as a CNA, you need to know what type of care you're going to be providing for that resident, and those assessments and evaluations determine that. So that leaves you with C, an evaluation of a physical therapist. We have to see what the needs are so that we can therefore set goals for the resident and what their goals are in independence and getting stronger and back to a sense of normalcy. So understanding that is going to be key. All right. Number 5, the physical therapist works mostly on, and you should get this because I just, like, a few questions ago told you what a physical therapist does, right? So a physical therapist does what? So this, again, knowledge questions. And I know you're probably thinking, why would the state want to ask me about the physical therapist? As a CNA in a facility, you need to understand the role and the responsibilities, or what we call the scope of practice, the scope in which each person in a facility works, and what what is their role in the care of that resident. Because if certain things are happening outside of your nurse should always be the first next person. You can also know what things should be communicated to another discipline, like a therapist, right? I don't want to go to the therapist and say, Mrs. Smith has stomach pain, unless it's therapy time and they're wanting me to bring them, right? But ultimately, if that patient or resident is complaining about stomach pain and not feeling well, the person I should direct my communication to should always be my nurse, my charge nurse. So that's why The state may ask questions about speech therapists, your charge nurse. Who do you report to? Because you need to know how they function so we can function as a team when we're taking care of the resident. So, will the physical therapist work on swallowing difficulties, restorative efforts, fine motor skills, or gross motor skills? So, again, this is a knowledge question in regards to knowing what is motor and gross and fine, right? So, fine motor skills is the little ones. I couldn't remember the name earlier, but it's the little, I don't know what else to call them, but they're the little details. Like me, like literally wrapping my hand around the pen, knowing how to position my fingers and writing is a fine motor skill. Me picking up a toothbrush and brushing up and down is a fine motor skill. I'm using little like muscle groups to be able to accomplish this task. Versus gross, and maybe the word can help you understand. Gross means big muscle groups, like my hand movements. If a resident fail and they're weak, a physical therapist is going to work on big muscles to help them navigate that and get stronger. So when they're standing up, when they're putting on their clothes, they now have the strength in the big muscle groups to be able to do those tasks. So that should give you your answer. Physical therapists work on gross motor skills. Another way to think about this is that if you have a personal trainer, guess what? They're working on gross motor skills, right? Your personal trainer not gonna go and be like, okay, instead of you doing push-ups, I need you to write your name, right? Like you're gonna be like, wait, you wasted my time and my money. I came to lose weight, right? So I always kind of look at them similar because the strengthening and the exercises and the goals align. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Number 6, the person responsible for maintaining a resident's level of ability through range of motion exercises is A, occupational therapy, B, nursing assistant, C, licensed practical nurse, D, physical therapist. The person responsible for maintaining a resident's level of ability through range of motion exercises is one of those disciplines. All right. So I want to see if you're able to think about who would be responsible for maintaining that and why. And I'll just give you a second to think about that and put your options in um, in the chat box and in the comment section on YouTube or on Instagram, wherever you're joining. All right. So I hope you've been able to put your options in the box, and let's see. Nursing assistant. I know, honestly, I try to prep for the prep and I'm a little shocked. And my only rationale with this question is that the occupational therapists or physical therapists really would be doing the range of motion, will actually, what is the word? They only work with them for a certain period of time, right? So outside of that session, that 30 minutes or 45-minute session, who do they spend most of their time with? The nursing assistant. And you would be able to consistently maintain this person's abilities as they're doing their ADLs and as you're providing that support. And you would also be the one to be able to report back even more closely that um, that person is not doing well in regards to what the therapist has in line and the goals that has been set. So that's another thing to think about. And that's why I think the nursing assistant here and why they are choosing this option. I think that makes more sense to me why that is. Okay. So I know it's weird. I thought it was a little weird also. Let's go into our next question. All right, let's chime in. Let me just make sure that let's see, it's not giving me. Okay, perfect. Make sure our not YouTube, but Instagram people are holding on here. Perfect. So number 7 question. So we're going over CNA prep for those who just joined. We're on the 7th question. Don't worry. This is just a snippet for those that are on Instagram. If you want to see the full video, I highly recommend you go to YouTube. All of the preps from the beginning of the month to today being the last day is posted and it's there to live. So utilize it as a prep. So number 7 says, you notice that one of your residents is having difficulties at meal time. She has trouble swallowing her fluids and coughs with each bite. The person who could best help her would be the A, occupational therapist, B, restorative aid, C, speech language pathologist, which is a speech therapist, or D, physical therapist. So notice that our questions today are different, right? Because you're like, well, what does the CNA have to do with this? Why would the state give us questions like that? And as I mentioned earlier, knowing the role and the scope that these other disciplines or these other roles or titles or people that have these titles, occupational therapists, etc., knowing what their role is important, because again, you are the eyes and the ears of the community in a long-term care facility. You are it, okay? Ready or not. You're going to be able to see the changes that are happening in the residents, and you're going to need to communicate first to who? Your nurse. Remember that. Second, you're going to, if that person is in not a nursing home or long-term care facility with that also has a rehabilitation floor, whatever wing, guess what? They're going to definitely be a part of the care plan, and your notes, your reports, the changes, the improvements that is seen is going to be a lot of times seen by the CNA more than any other discipline in that facility. So we know this resident is having trouble swallowing, right? It tells us that, and we know that because when she drinks, or when she drinks fluids or eats food, I know I'm getting tongue tied. She's coughing. And remember, that's a hallmark sign for swallowing changes, right? And challenges. Remember that. That is a hallmark sign. That's easy for you to pay attention to. We're not talking about Texas allergies. We're talking about anytime this person puts something in their mouth, they're coughing. Who is the discipline that focuses on that? If you don't know that, guess what? This is a knowledge question. Chapter 1 goes into chain of command and disciplines, but also you have a restorative chapter towards the end of your book. And I love to test my knowledge here. I believe it's going to be chapter 9. So chapter 9. Chapter 9 goes into rehabilitation and restorative care. Okay. So this person that is responsible are going to help us with understanding the significance of the swallowing and the challenges that is being had is going to be your speech language pathologist or speech therapist. So when you think about speech, don't just think about words. Think about anything that has to do with memory and mouth. All right. The speech pathologist is a specialty, and I highly respect those people. I've seen them do things and be able to work with residents who have cognitive impairments, and just by working with them and their mind and their memory, I've seen things that I wouldn't think I would have seen before. But they also deal with swallowing, right? The mouth, right? So they will be able to do what we call a swallowing study. Sometimes they'll do a bit of side-by-side look at the patient or resident while they're eating and see how often they're coughing, look at their swallowing reflexes. But then we have another level type test to actually see where the food is going, this is the person we typically will start with. So if you didn't know, now you know, right? Now you know what is one of the things that they are helpful and responsible for. Number 8, GAYLE is an older resident who uses a wheelchair to move about the facility. You encourage her to ambulate with you, but she often refuses. You should A, encourage her to walk in her room. B, inform the nurse that GAYLE no longer walks. C, tell GAYLE that she needs to ambulate at least twice a day. Or D, refer her to her physical therapist. So what is the question asking us? Number 1, we have a resident who has a wheelchair and that uses that wheelchair to navigate where they go in the facility. We encourage this resident, you encourage her to ambulate. So ambulate is a medical term that means to walk. But this resident often refuses you. What should you do? Right? What should you do? Should you encourage her? Should you just tell the nurse, hey, Miss GAYLE don't want to walk? Tell GAYLE that she needs to ambulate at least twice a day? Refer her to the physical therapist. All right. What do you think? Put your answer options in the comment box. If you put A, encourage her to walk in her room, then you have the correct answer. We want to start with the least resistance, like what is the quickest thing that I can do? Maybe not quickest is a good term, but what is the next best thing that I can do, right? In this moment, the resident is refusing. Why? Miss GAYLE, is everything okay? Is your legs hurting? Are you in pain? No, honey, I just don't think I can do it. Oh, really? Well, you remember we did it yesterday and you were able to make it to your chair. We can do it today. And guess what? I'm here to help you walk. You're not going to do this alone. Let's try to do it together. And we can take our time. If you need to take a break, pause, guess what? We can do that. Encourage her because now you know why. And maybe she just need a little extra encouragement. And she's like, okay, honey, you know, that's the quickest thing that can happen. And then we go from there, right? If she's just resistant, then we go to the next level, which is letting the nurse know, I tried to do this, but Ms. GAYLE refused. But again, you want to encourage your residents. You don't want to just take a no as a no all the time. Because sometimes there's other things going on. What if the resident is in pain? And if we don't ask why and what's going on, what's different, we never discover what could be happening, right? So we're going to encourage her. In that encouragement, we're going to identify why she's refusing. Number 9, assisting a resident with ambulation can decrease the resident's risk of A, constipation, B, arthritis, C, diarrhea, or D, nausea. Assisting a resident with ambulation can decrease the resident's risk of constipation, B, arthritis, C, diarrhea, D, nausea. Hopefully you got constipation. All right. I don't think I need to add any dialogues to this. Constipation, movement, movement, movement. Let's go, right? If the more the resident moves and hydrates, the more things will flow the way it should. 10, an intervention often used to relieve the pain and swelling associated with acute injuries is A, ice pack, B, topical ointment, C, ambulation, or D, an aqua K-pad. An intervention often used to relieve pain and swelling associated with acute injuries is, so remember, acute is like what? Short term, right? Remember that word acute? Short term, right? This is not something that what we call is chronic, means ongoing long-term management. Do we use ice packs for swelling and pain? Do we place an ointment? Do we walk on something that's swollen and painful? Or do we use an aqua K-pad? one of the things I would ask is like, do I know what all of these answer options are? Like, do I know what an aqua pad is? Ambulation means to walk. If a person is, and it says to relieve, keyword, pain. So walking ain't relieving it, right? So we can eliminate. I always love process of elimination. If you can readily identify an option that's just not it, then get it off your mind. Don't even look at it when you go back to reread it. It's not an option. We scratched it, right? Topical ointment, maybe we'll keep that. Or ice pack. What sounds about right to you, right? This is one of those like, do we typically want to go and touch and rub that area? Or will we place ice on it to try to get the swelling down and numb it and help with that process? All right, maybe you already know. A ice pack. Ice pack. 11. Properly sized crutches should have a space between the resident's underarms and the crutch that measures how many inches. Okay. So A 0, B 1 inch, C 2 inches, sorry, and 3 inches. This is definitely a knowledge question. All of these are like, do you know it or you don't? Are you gonna put a really good old guess in that bad boy? So for if you're working with a resident that has some type of assistive device like walker, crutches, especially if you're a restorative aid, we see that role in long-term care facilities. You may use you definitely will learn and understand more about the proper level and height of devices for safety. So this might not be one that just comes naturally in your knowledge because it's not something you always have to understand, right? I've not necessarily seen an older person with crutches, but hey, in this question, it's possible. The answer is going to be C, 2 inches. So that means they should have at least a 2-inch gap between the top of that crutch to the underarm. And why would that even be the case? I'm a why girl. Why does that matter? Circulation, constant pressure, right? It matters also about alignment of that person's body when they're using that assistive device. That's why you don't see wheelchairs or walkers like way low to the ground and this person leaning over. If you see somebody humped over in their walker, then it's because it's not at the right height or level. And that's when you can incorporate a therapist, your physical therapist, to help with making sure it's the right height for safety. 12. The nursing assistant should lock the resident's wheelchair when she is A, ambulating the resident down the hallway, B, assisting the resident with a quad cane, C, transferring the resident from bed to wheelchair, or D, placing the resident at the dining room table. When should a nursing assistant lock a wheelchair? Y'all, everybody better get this right. Especially if you're at Williams Career School of Excellence. I need this to be a correct answer on the top. If not, we need to go back and read this book. When should we lock a resident's wheelchair? Transferring the resident from bed to a wheelchair. Anytime we move in that person's body into this wheelchair or out of this wheelchair, it needs to be locked. Okay? It needs to be locked. Hear me loud, hear me. You do not want this resident on the floor. You don't want to hurt your back and injure yourself. This is one-on-one safety. One of your skills in the state of Texas, and I'm trying to think South Carolina, I'm sure most states is going to have a transferring that resident from bed to chair. Lock that wheelchair. You're not going to pass that test if you don't lock it and you're transferring another student. You need to be safe. This is safety 101, okay? Awesome. Number 13, we have 2 more questions. John is a 50-year-old resident who is working on ambulation and fine motor control in his hands following a motorcycle accident. Those involved in his therapy might include A, an occupational therapist, B, his wife and children, C, the physical therapist, or D, B and C. What is the question asking us? This is a 50-year-old resident who's working on ambulation, fine motor control in his hands following a motor vehicle accident. Who would be involved in the therapy, the recovery, and restoration of this person? Wife and children, yeah, they're going to be supportive, visiting, but who's going to be a part of the care plan to get this resident better is what the question is asking you. And you should have placed D in your options. Awesome. All right, Instagram, we're going to say bye. You want to see the full video, go to YouTube. Look, we have 3 weeks worth of reviews where we're covering questions, understanding why, the thought process on what you're being tested. I know you got this. Just let's get the study tools together. Let's review, listen to the videos on your ride. You ain't always got to sit down in front of your desk. You can be listening to things as you go and do about your daily life, just like you do music. You sing it, you rehearse it, it's in it. This is how you study. Bring it into your world. All right, y'all have a good night. Awesome. 14, IADL's activities might include learning how to A, walk with a prosthetic leg, B, cook supper with a broken arm, C, wash yourself following a stroke, or D, climb stairs safely. So we know what ADLs stand for. Do you know what IADLs stand for? That's going to be a question because you might be thrown up like, okay, I know it has to do with activities of daily living, but what is the I stand for, right? What does the I stand for? So this again is a knowledge question. This is a knowledge question. What does IADLs means? IADLs means instrumental activities dailies of living. Activity of daily living. Sorry. These are things that you do every day to take care of yourself and your home. They're one way to measure how well you can live in your home, while ADLs, activities of daily living, are basic self-care tasks like bathing. IADLs require more complex planning and thinking. So now that we understand what IADLs are, which one would be more complex in planning or thinking from what you can understand? All right, what would that be? Would it be walking with a prosthetic leg? Would it be cooking with a broken arm? Would it be washing yourself following a stroke, or D, climbing stairs? Hopefully you put B, cook supper with a broke arm. Does that make sense? Complex, planning, etc. Does that help? Yes? Because I got to plan what I'm going to eat, number one. And the person got one arm. Hello. Number two. Right? That's a lot. That's a lot more than taking a shower. And that falls, taking a shower actually falls underneath ADLs, which is the activities of daily living that you would be typically helping a person with, right? So it's good to know. Now you know. Number 15, last but not least, your resident has Parkinson's disease and is quite shaky at meal times. The best device to help the resident maintain independence during meals is A, a cup with handles, B, a cup with a cover, C, a nosy cup, or D, a cup with a vowels. And this is going to be in chapters 9 and the nutrition, potentially 8. Because this has to do with meals and other assistive devices is what we call it, that could be added to help this patient or resident be more independent during their meal time. And as a CNA, knowing and understanding these tools are so important because you may be giving and helping and supporting the residents' use of these tools. One of the things I love to do, especially if you're a visual learner, is look up cups that can be utilized with residents or patients who have Parkinson's, and have a visual understanding of how these cups look, how they're designed, and how they will potentially help your resident who has Parkinson's or some other condition to be independent in their meal times. Another thing is that this resident is shaking. So what is our concern during the mealtime is that if their hands are shaking, right, will the food or water liquid make it to their mouths to be able to eat and ingest? Or because the rapid of the tremors and the shaking, will it spill over, right? So we want to create independence. You should have did a cup with a cover, right? Makes sense because according to the question, this resident is shaky at mealtime. So that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to ensure that they get the food that has been delivered to them in the fullness of that delivery. Right? Awesome, awesome.
2, 3.
Awesome. All right, you made it to the end. Congratulations. Congratulations. This is our last week of our CNA review prep. Let me know if you want this to happen again. I'm definitely looking at planning on doing that because I enjoy it. And I know that there are viewers that are going to come across this video everywhere that's going to just need extra tools as they're living their lives. And I know that listening on the go, as I did in nursing school, was so helpful to me being successful and prepping for my exams. So I always have this like motto, you need to shine and shine on, okay? Don't let your light dim for nobody. Study for this exam, show that proctor that you know what you're doing and that you're becoming an excellent healthcare professional. Because guess what? We do need you. We need you. We need you, sis. We need you. If you are in the San Marcos, Austin, New Braunfels, Wimberley, Bastrop, Elgin, Austin, San Antonio, okay, area, we have many programs that we offer from CNA, Med-Aid, HVAC, phlebotomy tech, medical assistant is going to be launching. We have other things coming down the pipeline, but we have evening programs. We have some day options for certain classes, and we would love to see you in our class. We would love to help you get to where you want to be. Thank you so much for joining us and joining this live prep for over the last 3 weeks. Again, if you're watching the replay, go back. All 3 videos have been posted and they're there to stay. Utilize these tools and do it, okay? Thank you so much for joining. You have a good night.